Well, thank you for having me here. I'm really happy to come and speak to sort of potential future teachers about just how wonderful this profession is. So I'm going to tell you my story, and a bit like Caroline, it was something that I did fall into over sort of many, many years. I didn't start my teaching degree until I was 29, which is quite late, so I'd spent a long time studying, doing a PhD, spent a little bit of time in the corporate world, which I ran away from as fast as I could to come back, because what I really did want to do, and I was sort of won over by the Department of Education catchphrase, teach and make a difference. And that's really why I went into teaching, to teach in state schools, to teach particularly in low socioeconomic schools, and to really have my go at making a difference. And I think that many teachers do go out with that sentiment, that they want to go out and really sort of make a difference in the world and teach in some sort of more underprivileged schools. Thinking about it and having that ideal and then getting out there is a bit of a shock. And I remember very, very clearly, and I tell this story over and over again to all of the prac students that come through our school, one of my very first lessons at a Southwest Sydney high school, the university supervising teacher was coming in to watch this lesson, and as she walked through the door, this chair went flying across the room. Class rioting. Could I get their attention? Standing at the front, class, give me your attention, listen to me. And of course they were not going to give me their attention. They were not going to listen to me, and they were very, very, very challenging and difficult to engage in any lesson. And in many classes, that is often the reality of teaching in some Southwest Sydney schools, that it is really tough, and particularly tough when you're in your first year. But you don't give up, and you do persist. And the rewards that you can get from teaching in those kind of schools is really, really wonderful. Another one of those lessons was me standing in front of this girl trying to get her to do some work, and she just glared back at me and said, "Miss, do you have any idea how much I hate you?" It's like, oh, what have I done? I'm just trying to get you to work. I want you to learn. I want you to progress. I'm trying to help. But yeah, that was not what they were interested in doing. And for me, in many ways, that highlights the social justice issue, that these kids are going to reject education. They are going to not see its value. I grew up knowing the value of education. My parents valued education, but that's not necessarily shared across all of the kids that I teach. So telling them, oh, do this because it's good for you, do this because you're going to learn, is not going to engage them, and it's not going to be enough. So that's really what drove me into teaching, wanting to make a difference, but then realising it is a big challenge to make that difference, but then not wanting to give up and not wanting to be disheartened by losing control of a class, because there's no other feeling in the world than standing in front of a classroom and just, they're not listening. They are really not interested in anything I have to say today. So that was the one reason. The second reason, which is something that I think I've discovered more as I've been teaching, because I think one of the reasons that I put off going into teaching for a long time was because I sort of thought it was not really that intellectual. It was a little bit lower. I was sort of doing a PhD, thinking kind of an academic career, and I thought teaching, my mother taught, my aunts teach, my stepdad taught. It was kind of just falling into the family profession, and I kind of wasn't that keen to go there. But once I've got there, I've realised just how high of an intellectual challenge it is. And this is sort of something that's been mentioned in both our previous two speakers, that when we study history, we are very much trying to think about the content and think about what we're wanting to research and write about. And a lot of what we do, we're just doing automatically without thinking about, well, how do I know when I'm reading this text that I can see that there's a perspective in this, or I can see that history is being constructed in this book. And I know that because I have been a historian and I've researched and I've done the work of an historian. But when I actually start to pull apart, well, what am I actually doing as an historian? And if I can identify the concepts that I instinctively understand, or I've been taught and I didn't realise I had been taught them, and the skills that I instinctively had or have been taught, if I can identify what they are and then break them down and think, well, how do I teach that to kids who maybe do come from an ESL background and don't have the literacy background that I have, or kids that aren't as engaged in history as what I intrinsically was? How do I actually teach them? What are the skills and the concepts about being an historian that I can teach to you, and I can help you progress in that? And that is really intellectual. That is kind of really getting to the heart of what it is to be an historian, how I can then articulate that, and then how I can teach that to students. The other really intellectual challenge, and again, this is something that I've come from being at the school that I'm at now, which is Chester Hill High School, which is a very, very multicultural school. We represent nearly, I think, every culture possible in the world. And I have developed at this school a course which is something I've often thought of Catherine, when Catherine used to talk about that she would do teaching-led research, that she would be teaching a course and then that would then fall back on her research. And I kind of feel I've done the same thing at Chester Hill High School in developing this course. very big population of the community come from the Middle East. And I've developed this history elective course, which is all about the history of the Middle East, from the very, very ancient times to the very, very modern times. And this has just opened up a world of historical knowledge for me that I had no idea about before. When I was doing my PhD, I was writing on Cicero. It was about Western conceptions of justice, and it was looking very much at this Western little world. Never once did I think much about what was going on in the East. I knew Antony went over there and fought, he went over there with Cleopatra, but I didn't ever really think too much about the East. And now, to actually have really delved into this whole ancient history right up to modern times and how much it affects many of the kids' lives who are in my classroom, that it is something that I think is really important for them, not only to know the content, but also if they can look at things and understand things like perspective and understand things like that history is constructed and understand how things are contestable, that's a really important skill for them to take out into the world when they're watching the news, when they're not often, but we have had occasions when some of the news articles about people going over to fight in Syria or holding up their heads, a teacher will go, I think that kid went to Chester Hill High School. They've changed their name, but I think that kid went here. So I think that, we are really at a place where teaching this history and allowing sort of this Eastern perspective to come through into what I grew up in, a very Western sort of historical perspective, is really, really important. And I think that is something that's just broadened my historical understanding. And I'm always aware now, I teach a class full of kids and we might be doing the Gallipoli campaign and then there's Turkish kids in the classroom. It's like, well, yeah, Gallipoli, it's an invasion and we are here invading these foreign shores. And for that to have that perspective is something that I perhaps didn't think about when I was caught in my little Western way of viewing things. Same when we watch Kokoda and kids go, Miss, I go for the Japanese. It's like, yeah, all right, go for the Japanese. It's interesting perspective, and I think that this is what I'm learning from really sort of engaging in this school that I'm at now. So this history elective course that I have developed, this Middle Eastern history from ancient times to modern times, has for this year had 67 kids choose it going into next year's Year 9. And before I arrived at the school as head teacher, there was no history elective. History was kind of on a real decline. And this year in Year 9, we've got one history elective course, and then for next year there'll be 3. And I just feel like one of the wonderful things that I'm doing at this school is really just lifting up history and sort of allowing all of these students who may not have had this kind of contact or this enjoyment of history to really get on board. And I love it, and I love teaching in this school, and I love teaching generally. And I think you can make a difference, and it can be tough, but it is really, really a worthwhile profession, and I love it very much. Thank you.